Madam President, and to our leader here on the floor, and to colleagues who have come together to talk about this important issue for us as a nation from an energy perspective. And we mentioned the jobs and the benefits that flow to our nation's economy. When we talk about the issue of energy independence, there was a time when people would scoff at the notion that as a nation we would ever have a level of independence. And I guess I look at it and say, energy independence to me is a place where we are no longer vulnerable for our energy sources from those who would wish us ill. What has happened to this nation in the past half dozen years has really been transformational. We talk about the shale revolution. We talk about a renaissance. But what this really means to us is that we are truly approaching that point where we are more energy secure, and from a national security perspective, the vulnerability that we once had is greatly lessened because of our own ability to produce our own resources for our people. But it's not just within the continental United States. It's Alaska, as we point out, but it is North America. So we're talking about North American energy independence and what that entails and what that means. And so when we think about where we have come and the fact that next year we will be producing more oil than Saudi Arabia, who would have thought that the United States would be in this perspective? Who would have thought that we would have a conversation about energy abundance rather than energy scarcity? And it hasn't happened because this oil has just suddenly migrated to North America. It's always been there. But it's been our technology, it's been our ingenuity that allows us to access it. But think what we can do when we partner with our friends and neighbors, whether it's Canada to the north or Mexico to the south. And so when we talk about energy independence and energy security, the Keystone XL pipeline is kind of that corridor that helps connect us as two nations. And the benefits that derive to both of us are quite considerable. We're talking about jobs for America, and we should be. But I think we also need to recognize that when we're talking about the Keystone XL pipeline, it's about a trade relationship with our closest neighbor and truly our closest ally, and the benefits that come to both of us because of this relationship. There's a phrase that is used. We say that the United States and Canada are joined at the well. Literally joined at the well. And this is something that the Congressional Research Service actually says. But there are currently 19 cross-border oil pipelines that are already operating between the United States and Canada or Mexico. And this is in addition to all of the dozens of natural gas, the electric transmission lines. These are oil pipelines that are crossing the border with Canada into Montana, into North Dakota, into Michigan, into New York, into Washington, into Vermont. You would think that this Keystone XL was like the first pipeline to ever cross the border from the north to the south. It is some new precedent setting. There are 19 cross-border oil pipelines. Back in 2009, this Obama administration, came to a decision about the Alberta Clipper project. This was yet another pipeline from Canada to the United States. They were able to, there were arguments for and against, but ultimately Clipper was approved just as Keystone XL should be approved. So when we're talking about plowing new ground here, I think it's important for people to recognize there's no new ground that we're plowing here. This is just a reticence and a reluctance from an administration to do what I think people across the country believe is the right and the reasonable thing, not only from a jobs perspective, from an economic perspective, but from a energy security perspective as well as a relationship with our closest friend and ally. I know that my colleague from Kentucky had an opportunity to serve with our former colleague here, Senator Ted Kennedy. And I'm not going to ask you, my friend, whether or not you recall the quote, but I think it is important to kind of put in context. We have not, as a nation, always been opposed to importing this crude from Canada. As I mentioned, 19 cross-border agreements in place today. But back in 1970, the Nixon administration announced that they were going to place a quota on Canadian oil exports. This was when things around the country were getting really dicey. It was Senator Ted Kennedy that led the fight against this. And he said, and this is a quote from a Senate hearing back in March of 1970, Senator Kennedy said, "The reason why Canadian oil has never been restricted in the past is obvious. Canadian oil is as militarily and politically secure as our own, and thus there can be no national security justification for limiting its importation." So not only is this an issue that's been going on for a long time, both sides of the aisle recognize that there is an imperative when you come together with your allies for a resource that we recognize is of benefit to all, creates jobs for all. So I asked my colleague from Kentucky, because you have not only served in this body for considerable years, but you have been through these debates over the decades. And the question is, why is this Keystone XL pipeline being held out to be such a groundbreaking initiative that this president would put a hold on it for 5 years?